Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is kind of an extra bit. It's a continuation of a piece I did yesterday concerning firms data. And some of you say, oh, don't waste your time involving yourself with sort of Russian trolls. It's not a good use of your time. I love doing this, right? This is what I've done for the last 15 years in the world of philosophy, with arguments on my blogs or arguments on my articles, and I get off on doing this, but also it's really important. If someone accuses me being wrong, I need to know whether I am wrong. In my head, if I'm wrong, I have to change my position, right? Because I'm not someone that can bury my head in the sand and just carry on just existing, knowing that I was wrong over there. A lot of people can do that. I can't. And in the world of philosophy, if some of your bricks down here are incorrect and you're building bricks on top of that, then your whole foundation of your worldview and everything you think is really, really shaky. I wrote a book recently, which sets up a brick wall, talking about building up my entire worldview from the bottom up, and every brick has to be really, really sturdy. So if someone says, hey, you're completely wrong here, and they're publicly calling me out, even if they're a troll, there's a part of me that's like, well, am I wrong? I need to have a look at this. So what happened is a guy called me out, and I explained yesterday, and I kind of debunked at least half of what he said. And he was a bit confused about what his claims were. But one part of the claims, well, the part that I could understand initially, was he was saying that there was no firms data that he could find. So what is firms data? It is NASA satellite data of heat signatures around the world that show you significant fires or heat in certain places. And you can use that to look for wildfires. That's why it's originally devised. And now you can see if it confirms data concerning the war. And he said, look, at this point in the video, you're talking about that, the strike, as he says here, if that's all we need to know, the strike on a hospital in Dnipro did not happen. The firm's view does not show any fire near a hospital there. So I spent then that video, where is it, talking about how firm's data does confirm that, right? And that fire in Dnipro at that hospital did take place, and not only do we have video evidence of it taking place, and we have documentary evidence of it taking place, we have firms data that confirms those other claims. So firms data is at least confirmatory, so it can confirm the evidence that you might have elsewhere of a fire taking place. Then he said, well, actually, that okay, and he admitted he was half wrong, right? So that's cool. But he said, actually, the main thing I wanted to talk about was actually not that timestamp, and this is why I was like, I don't really know quite what you're saying. And he's now subsequently clarified what his accusations were, which is on this video. I talked about, I was talking about this strike that Perun on his video was talking about in Berdiansk, not Berdiansk, in Berislav near Kherson. But it's on the back of quite a lot of other data. And I said, firms doesn't show any explosions there. And that's all you need to know. That and all the claims that had just gone before that, which is what were the claims. And this is really significant. And why I'm going through this isn't about like trying to prove myself right against someone else. Hopefully, like yesterday, loads of people are like, oh, thank you for doing that video, because actually I really learned a lot about firms. I'm going to teach you a little, that's really quite patronizing, isn't it? I want to explain to you how important something called absence of evidence is in terms of constructing arguments and conclusions, right? It's really super important, and it's so important for this point this guy makes. Anyway, let's just go back to the original Perun claim. The Perun claim is that the Russians claimed on a specific date at a specific place to have destroyed a Ukrainian hangar that had 25 pieces of equipment in. And you would assume, as Perun says, you'd have all the fuel to go with that, so that these things could actually drive, and other bits and pieces and ammunition on board all these bits of kit. And so if you're going to blow that up, right, not only are you going to see satellite imagery of a changed hangar, like it's destroyed, it was not destroyed here, and a later satellite image it is destroyed now, and you didn't have that. But also, with that kind of significant explosion and fire, you would have firms data. Now, I said that, and that's all you need to know. Now he said, hang on, this chap called Name, this pro-Russian voice said, hang on. So there was another claim, which was this, and it was of a building. What happened is the Russians were attacking. You had a drone flying over. It being shot down, exploding and falling on buildings. Now, whether it was this exact building it fell on, I don't know. That image, that video, there were two buildings involved here. And the one that's important for what this guy is saying is, and a separate blaze at a business in the Holosivsky district, right? So there's this claim in a Holosivsky district, and the mayor Klitschko said there was a roof on fire, and the claim was there's a roof on fire, three-story house, or three-story building in that district, and your man here went and did a firm's check on that, okay, and said, well, actually, that fire didn't appear to be there, and I'm going to confirm that claim that there was no firm's data. So this is a 4-week firm's analysis, and we're going to go to Kiev, and this is really significant, and this is why I wanted to do this video, because actually this piece of data is itself really interesting to take note of. So here we have, you can see this is a 4-week heat map of all the big fires around Ukraine. You can see there's a lot of them. You can see, there are hotspots, particular hotspots. But when we go to look at Kyiv and the entire oblast of Kyiv, if you like, the city, there is literally only one fire of that size actually pretty close to the district we're talking about, but it is not the fire that was being mentioned on the roof of that building. In 4 weeks, there's only one. So what's going on there? Either Kyiv has some kind of operational security whereby the firm's data is blacked out for the whole of Kyiv, or firm's data doesn't show up here for other reasons, right? Now, then we go and look at what the building in question was, right? And the building is this 3-story building. This was, I think, taken on the night. So Mayor Klitschko says more than 20 drones have been shot down already, and there's another wave just arriving and new explosions heard in the last 10 minutes. In Holosivsky district, a fire started after a falling drone hit the roof of a house and retail center. And that is apparently the image of that, which suggests that the fire is already put out, right? So you've got a fire on a 3-story building roof. Doesn't say how big that is, but you can see that is not a massive, substantial piece of damage there. That is, a roof hit, and the fire apparently is already out. Right. Now I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about the limitations of firms. And this is an article in Medium that is entitled Exploring Whether NASA Firms Can Accurately Be Used for Open Source Intelligence Activities. And this is where hopefully all of this is quite useful for you. Now, what is important is understanding the limitations of this data. And this paragraph kind of sums everything up. Generally, under suitable conditions, super important point to begin with, the system can detect both flaming and smouldering fires of 1,000 square meters in size. Big fires. But under optimal conditions, so if all the conditions, all the variables are just right, as small as 50 square meters in size, I would argue that the fire we're talking about is not even as big as 50 square meters or could have been, right? So I don't think it's even detectable by firms anyway. However, there can be a multitude of reasons as to why a fire goes undetected. The most obvious being when it breaks out and dies down between satellite observations. So there aren't always satellites overhead at any particular place. I mean, in terms of what kind of satellite network you're talking about, go and check Perrin's space video out recently. Very good. When you have these firm satellites passing overhead, it could be that a fire breaks out and is put out before the satellite comes back round to be able to catch that, or various satellites. So you can have a fire catching a blaze and then being put out, and that would never register, even if it was big enough. But obviously, the bigger a fire, the longer it takes to put out. So it is unlikely that's going to be the place. This is where we're going to compare the hangar-size fire to a small fire on a roof that is put out relatively quickly, because there's no burning fuel and ammunition and tanks and whatnot. There's just a bit of roof. as you can see from the image. It goes on. A fire can also go under the radar when a cloud, heavy smoke, or tree canopy obscures it. Now, I checked the weather for this time period, and it was partly cloudy. Whether there was clouds there or not, I don't know at the exact time, but it was partly cloudy. When the satellite instruments fail, or when the fire itself is too small or too cool in temperature. Again, we don't know how big and how hot this fire was. All we know that it was, I think we can be confident it was a small fire and it's put out quickly. So I talked yesterday about, or this morning indeed, about firms being confirmatory. It can confirm things, but it's very hard to disprove something happened. Now he's going back to my claim, and that's all you need to know. But that's all you need to know is it does a lot of work, and I'm going to explain the work it does. So just understanding how firms doesn't always catch everything, and how the situation here, I would suggest, would be one where the fire A wasn't big enough, B was probably put out before satellites passed over, or both, C there might have been cloud cover. And in fact, it appears that nothing in Kiev over the last month, and we know for sure Kiev has had fires and explosions and stuff happening a number of times over the last month. But what's interesting is that only one of these shows up, which would suggest to me that most of the issues of falling debris have been small fires that have been put out quickly and haven't registered on firms. Because, plenty of other things have registered on firms, right? It's not like Kiev is some kind of special place and they're not showing data. There is data there, and in fact, earlier on in the war, there's plenty more data when there were larger fires in Kiev. But I think with better air defense and with emergency services working really, really well, you are getting fires that start, but they're smaller and get put out. The thing is that what was reported about Hangar wouldn't have been a small fire. So there's this saying in philosophy when you're talking about knowledge, and some people use it and they use it incorrectly. And the saying is, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So to unpick that, that's to say that if you don't have evidence of something happening, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And that sounds kind of intuitively plausible, and it works in some contexts, but it is actually a little bit incorrect. If you're really bored, I've written a book that has a chapter on this. The chapter is called Earthquakes, Saints, and the Absence of Evidence. And I've written pieces on this. I'll probably link this below. Absence of evidence is often evidence of absence. Right. So the key here is, if you would expect there to be evidence and evidence isn't there, that is evidence of absence. Let me give you an example. So if I said to you, you're my neighbor, you live next door. I saw your house being broken into yesterday. I saw someone climb through a window. And you look at me and say, well, okay, well, let's look at the evidence. There's no broken windows. I can see no evidence of anything being stolen. And I'd say, yeah, but I did see that. But you'd say, well, there's no evidence of that, therefore it didn't happen. I say, well, actually, just because there was no broken windows, there could have been a window left open. Someone could have got in and not found what they're looking for and got out again. So even though there's no evidence, it doesn't mean it didn't happen, because I saw it happening. So there's a good use of the maxim: absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So this is not evidence that it didn't happen. But if you'd expect there to be evidence. So here's another example which shows that maxim to be wrong. So I claim to you, hey, there's been an earthquake. You've been away from the town for a day. And you come back, you say, oh, I say to you, by the way, there's been an earthquake, 7.5 on the Richter scale. Huge earthquake in town. And you go, oh my goodness. And you turn on the news, you look at the news, not mentioned at all. And you flip through every news channel, nothing. You drive around town, there's no damage to anything. You don't hear anyone talk about it. When you ask people, they're like, they don't know anything about it. Now, if I'm claiming to you there's been a huge earthquake of 7.5 on a Richter scale in your local town, and you can find absolutely no evidence for that, where you would absolutely expect there to be evidence, then that lack of evidence is itself disconfirming of my claim, because you would absolutely expect there to be some and there is none. And this is a huge and important difference. So that first one, given that it's just someone going into the house and coming out, you might not expect there to be evidence, not 100%. So if I claim that someone broke in, but didn't break anything, and then that person left again, there wouldn't necessarily be evidence. You wouldn't definitely expect there to be evidence. But I'm saying there's a 7.5 Richter scale earthquake, you would definitely expect there to be evidence. And if there is none, then that is good evidence that that didn't happen. Right, let's apply that to the TAS claim. So there's a hangar with 25 pieces of equipment in, with, one would assume, ammunition and fuel. We haven't seen a change in the satellite imagery, and then we check firm's data. Now, the weakness of the firm's data is if you have a small fire that doesn't last very long and there might be cloud cover, etc., then it might not pick it up. Okay, that if you're talking about a hangar being taken out with 25 bits of equipment, as according to TAS, and all that ammunition, you would expect there to be a pretty sizable fire. It would be really difficult for firms not to pick that up. I have checked the firm's data, and there is no evidence of Berislav on those dates, on the day before as well, having any registered heat signature. In other words, I would suggest that the lack of firm's data here is evidence of absence, is evidence it didn't happen. But when we go back to look at this, the fact that there's no firm's data for this is not evidence it didn't happen, because these are two different types of fires, and one you would absolutely expect there to be evidence, and one you would not expect there to be evidence, given that the fire appears to be put out early and the fire appears to have been small, and there may have been cloud cover. That is a huge difference. So when this guy's saying, hey, and his latest point is, hey, you're a clown and blah, 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 it's like, dude, you need to understand kind of what's going on here, how to argue, and what the firm's data means. So he's talking about, and he did admit he was wrong for half of that, but he's talking about, hey, you're using double standards in how you apply firm's data. And it's actually, no, let's unpick this a little. It's, would I expect there to be firm's data for this? Yes. Would I expect there to be firm's data for this? No. Was there firm's data for this? No. Was there firm's data for this? No. But that lack is confirming evidence for that not happening there, and it's not confirming evidence for that not happening there, especially when we have visual evidence that happened. You're literally looking at it now. When you have declarations from locals and the mayor that it happened, and when we've got video evidence of a drone being shot down. So, the fact that everything there is coherent in what I'm presenting to you, for me, that's coherent evidence that it happened, but we are not seeing it on firms. And I understand why we're not seeing it on firms. And here we have a situation that the Russians are lying, and we've used all our different ways of trying to disconfirm that or verify that, and they've all failed for the Russians, and it didn't happen. So I'm confident that the Russians lied and the Ukrainians didn't lie, and firms in both cases act as a confirmation for one and not as a disconfirmation for the other. I hope that makes sense. If you really want, you can read my articles on absence of evidence, or you can buy my book here. If you're really religious, don't buy it. The Resurrection, a critical examination of the Easter story, where I talk about absence of evidence and an argument from silence as well. There's a chapter on an argument from silence, which is really what this is called, the argument from silence. Like, there is no evidence, so therefore, you can't argue it didn't happen. Well, it depends. It depends is always a good answer. Okay. I know that might not be super interesting for a lot of you, But I love to have a bit of crossover between a bit of philosophy and what we're doing here, and especially when we're trying to unpick whether the Russians are reliable, whether the Ukrainians are reliable, and in certain cases, what's the most plausible explanation of what took place, and plausible explanation of the data. In this case, what explains why there was not firms data in either of these places. Take care, and I'm going to do a proper extra now for later. Cheers. Bye bye.